Hello, welcome to Epicenter Bitcoin, the show which talks about the technologies, projects, and startups driving decentralization and the global cryptocurrency revolution. My name is Sebastien Couture.
And my name is Fabian Crain. So today we have a bit of a special episode. We are approaching our 1 year anniversary, or actually we did our pilot episode, I think just about a year ago, maybe a bit over a year ago.
Yeah,
And
actually, I think it was just about this time. It was right before New Year's, if I recall.
I think it was before Christmas. But then our first official episode was just around New Year's, right? So yeah, we've sort of come a full year, and as you know, as our listeners, we have been doing a lot of interviews recently. So we've been talking to a lot of people and getting their perspectives on things. And today we're going to do a bit of a different episode, in that it's just going to be the two of us, and we're going to have time to really dive into some of the things that happened this year, some of the areas that we find most interesting and most important. And we're also going to look out a bit and talk about 2015 and what we can expect in those different areas.
A fireside chat, I think we can call it.
Yes, a fireside chat, which also means we have secured ourselves some alcohol.
Yes.
Because otherwise it wouldn't be complete.
So what are you drinking there, Brian?
I'm having some port.
Let's see the bottle.
This is from a brand called Sandman. They are not our sponsor.
Very nice. And I'm drinking Muscat de Riesalt. I don't know if this is any good, but it's got the green label, so that means it's controlled by the state. Yeah, that means it's good.
Also, just before we get started, I wanted to announce, or at least let you guys know about the episodes that are coming up. So, which are going to be, again, more in line with what we've been doing recently. So we're going to have Robert Sams coming on in 1 week. Now, if you listen to our episode with Vitalik, we did talk a little bit about this idea of a stable coin. So a cryptocurrency that isn't volatile, but sort of adjusts its supply in a way that the price is relatively stable. And he's written a paper on that, and he's a well-known sort of a crypto economist and a hedge fund guy in London, and we're going to talk with him about that. It's a really interesting topic. Then we're going to have Preston Byrne and Sean Jones. Sean Jones, of course, has been many times doing regulatory stuff for Epicenter Bitcoin. And Preston Byrne has also been on our show in an interview once that Sean actually did. And so he started a new company called Iris Industries. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And the idea, I think, is to have some sort of decentralized autonomous organization framework that's also integrated in the legal framework, I think. But we will be diving into that. And I think Preston's a really interesting guy, and Sean, I think, will make for a really interesting topic.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're also going to have Adam Levine on probably in February, beginning of February. And we're going to talk about cryptocurrencies and media. And of course, Adam Levine played a crucial part in this podcast getting started, because we did our pilot episode as part of the Let's Talk Bitcoin contest a year ago.
So, I mean, looking back on the year, it's been an exciting year. We've done over 70 episodes, if you count in all the conference stuff that we did, different conferences like Berlin, London, and Amsterdam. And I got to say, I mean, in sum, I have to say it's been a pretty successful year. We were wrapping it up with a huge episode we did with Vitalik last week. So if you haven't heard that episode, definitely check it out. It's definitely our most popular episode, with I think about 2,000 views on YouTube just a week after its release. It was very interesting, and so yeah, I mean, I'm really happy to see like where we, from what we've gone, which was essentially a hobby. I mean, if you think about it at the beginning, to an actual business with an audience and a growing community. And I'm really looking forward to 2015. I think we have lots of things to do, and lots to build.
Absolutely. I think it will be interesting for us, and of course, correspondingly for Bitcoin, and the two are very tightly linked. And that's one thing. So, well, let's do this. So first of all, I want to briefly mention the topics we have before I sort of segue back to what I was going to say. So we're going to talk about regulation a bit. We're going to talk about adoption. We're going to talk about decentralized applications and sort of the Bitcoin 2.0 space. We're also going to talk about security. And that's sort of, in our view, some of the main interesting topics this year and looking forward. And before that, we wanted to just very briefly mention a few of the I don't know how you would call that, sort of the main things people focus on, or sort of drivers of the development, or maybe one could say marks of the development. So the first one,
that's a good way to call it, yeah.
Yeah, so the first one is price. Now, if you are listening to this, of course you are well aware that the Bitcoin price hasn't done too well in 2014. I think when we started this, and when a lot of people started things in Bitcoin space, was when the price was just going through the moon, and we passed $1,000 very briefly beforehand. And even though the price had gone down maybe a tiny bit, but at least personally I thought, and I think a lot of people felt, this is just sort of a speed bump, but now it's going to go full up to the moon. And that hasn't happened at all, right? So I think in many ways you can say 2014 was a good year. A lot of things have happened. But if you look at the Bitcoin price, it certainly doesn't look that way. What was your expectation, Sebastien, when you got into when we started out? Do you remember what you thought was going to happen with the Bitcoin price?
I guess I would say in retrospect, I naively thought that the price was going to continue to go up, which is why I bought a bunch of Bitcoin when the price was going up back in, I guess, December of last year. Probably not a good move at the time. Probably would have been best to wait a little bit until the price came back down again. But I mean, if you look at, I'm by no means qualified to give any sort of analytical information about price charts, but if you look at the price chart, it is, even though it has been in a steady, not a steady decline, but sort of stable decline in the last year from its peak at above $1,000. I mean, it's definitely above where it was in 2013. I don't want to say it's stabilized, but I mean, for the last few months, it's been hovering around between $500 and $400.
300.
5 and 300. Sorry, I keep doing the euro conversion. So I think we're better off now than where we were perhaps 18 months ago. But there is a lot of room to grow. That's for sure. I mean, I think we all like to see the price go up, and the price will bring in more people, and it's sort of a snowball effect where the more people come in, the more the price will probably go up, and then the more the price goes up, more people come in. And
Right. So I mean, I think the interesting thing is that I personally thought of the price as sort of a tracker of the Bitcoin, the state of Bitcoin, right? Like, where are we in the development of Bitcoin? And I think that's the way many people think and thought of the price. But what we've had in 2014 is a bit of a decoupling of that, because the price has done terribly, but at the same time, if you look at VC investment, which is another sort of interesting indicator, and also just the growth in the number of startups and the number of mature startups and the number of startups that are run by professional people who have experience, who have funding, etc., that has exploded. There was not very much a year ago. 2 years ago, there was practically nothing, and today there's quite a lot. So that has developed a lot. The price hasn't come along with that, and it would be interesting to speculate why. I think we did some of that with in the episode of Daniel Galanzi. But that being said, I do suspect that is going to change. I don't think this decoupling will continue, and I think somehow it has to catch up.
Right. No, I think that's a good way to look at it. The ecosystem is growing from within, with, like you said, startup growth, ecosystem, the investment community coming in and investing more and more in startups. I mean, we've seen just a growth of investment money in the last year. it has to catch up at some point. But then the question is, what happens? Does that bubble explode when that happens? You know, when the mainstream realizes that everybody is that they need to start looking at cryptocurrency. You know, will there be an explosion of the price, and then will it come back down again?
Well, I mean, in a sense, if there is a belief develops that cryptocurrency is sort of an asset of the future, then it never has to come down per se, right? Uh, it's not like stock where there's a bubble and there is some earnings that, you know, they're tied to the corporate activities. So at some point, that valuation has to come down unless the earnings go up. We don't have that with Bitcoin, right? There's nothing keeping it sort of down. That being said, one thing that is to consider is one thing we talk about with Vitalik as well, and we're going to talk about with Robert Sams. That's the whole idea of how good of a currency is Bitcoin, how good of a store of value is Bitcoin, and of course that may have an influence because we may have a success of cryptocurrencies, but maybe not with Bitcoin. So I think that's very possible. And of course, if that's the case, then there doesn't have to be any correlation anymore, right? We can have cryptocurrencies take over the world and Bitcoin go to zero. It's totally possible, I think.
I think that's probably one of the things that struck me most that stayed with me since from the Vitalik episode is you know, will Bitcoin be a stable unit of account? And his response was pretty simple: that probably won't be Bitcoin, because it has it doesn't have the attributes required to be a stable unit of account.
And to be honest, I think I do agree with him. There are a lot of people who have said that, you know, Bitcoin has become more stable over time, like less volatile, and maybe that is true. But I don't think that's something that will necessarily continue. I think even if Bitcoin isn't displaced by some other currency, and even if Bitcoin now breaks through and really gets used sort of globally as a world currency and payment, I think that is not going to decrease volatility at all. Because you will have a lot of people flushing into Bitcoin, people thinking like, where's this going to go? Do I need to move my money over there? That's going to have drive huge volatility. I mean, for the most part, in a good way, it's going to be upward volatility, but also downward. I mean, it's just going to be very volatile. And of course, one could imagine maybe in 20 years or 50 years, when everybody is using Bitcoin all the time, that you won't have these dynamics anymore. But that's a very, very long way to go if we ever get there. So in the meantime, I think Bitcoin is going to be very volatile. Now the question is, how much of a disadvantage is that? Does that mean it's not going to be used as a sort of the cryptocurrency of the future, or not? And I'm not sure where it's going to go. I think both scenarios are possible.
And I have a question for the economist in you. What would be to happen if so take for example, you know, we're a Bitcoin only company. We accept Bitcoin as payment from our advertisers, and we pay, I guess, most of our suppliers in Bitcoin, and you know, moving forward we'd like to pay all of them in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin companies that work closely together, as has been the case, I mean, a lot of companies in the Bitcoin space do work together. If they all start pricing in Bitcoin, is that feasible? Is that possible that the Bitcoin ecosystem prices in Bitcoin regardless of the volatility?
No, I get your question, and I think the answer is no. Because, I mean, the only scenario where you could imagine this is if you had some sort of closed-off system, right, where you don't interact with the outside world, but that is not true at all, right? I mean, even though we have most of our revenues in Bitcoin and we pay a significant part of our expenses in Bitcoin, nothing is priced in Bitcoin, right? Everything's priced in US dollars or euros or something like that. So you cannot just ignore that. It doesn't work at all, I think. So I don't think there's any way of that happening.
So I guess the next topic on the list is, still in this sort of general overview of the last year's media, and specifically the treatment of Bitcoin in mainstream media and how that's evolved. I think the general consensus in in Europe and also in the United States, I'm not sure that would be the case in Russia or China or countries like that, but my impression is that in the last year we've seen a trend where the media has become more sympathetic to Bitcoin, or at least not as they don't come down on it as much as they used to. I mean, when I first got into the Bitcoin ecosystem about a year ago, my impression was that the mainstream media was very negative about it, focusing on sort of like the speculative bubble and then Mt. Gox and all these other bad stories that happened in the past year. I think in the last 6 months we've seen sort of a general trend where the mainstream media is starting to get it. I don't know if it's also because governments have started to get it. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
I think that is going too far. I personally see a little bit of a divergence, and I think Bitcoin is being taken a lot more seriously in the tech space, in the startup space. So if you read like TechCrunch, and I think it really has broken through to an extent in the startup world, right? Especially in the Silicon Valley startup world, and I think that's reflected in the content and the treatment you see in on a site like TechCrunch, but also on some mainstream media that's more focusing on that. But then if you see the treatment in European newspapers, it's definitely, I think that has become sort of a voice, right, where it says, oh, Bitcoin is this interesting technology, it has a lot of potentials, it could lead to a lot of things, even Microsoft is accepting it now, that sort of thing. But at the same time, you still have a lot of voices that it is some sort of dubious thing, and like they're trying to do a currency which is a government job, or it's way too volatile, it's a speculative bubble. I think all of those are still very, very strong. But I think it has lessened a bit, right? And I think that other voice has gained in prominence.
I think we can say that it's sort of neutralized. So if the voice was mostly negative a year ago, it's more nuanced now, and we might look at both sides of the coin rather than simply looking at the negative sides.
Right. You still have the negative voices, but you also have some positive voices now, and you have some in the middle, and so.
Is there anything else you want to add to media?
No, I think that's it.
I mean, maybe one thing we can talk about is the Bitcoin media, Bitcoin-specific media. My view is that, of course, the price increase in December ushered in a whole bunch of new media outlets. I mean, there are definitely more podcasts than there were a year ago. There's more Bitcoin news sites now. I think there's lots more Bitcoin blogs and Bitcoin news sites. Which ones are qualitative and not? I think a lot of them are simply reblogging or reposting what the big ones are doing. But there's definitely more variety in terms of Bitcoin media. Like there's lots of new YouTube channels that have popped up in the last year as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting point. I mean, this is actually something I've been sort of watching over the year, of course, also from personal interest and from us doing Epicenter Bitcoin. And I've really been paying attention throughout the year to the Alexa ranking. So for those who don't know, Alexa, it's basically sort of a ranking of the popularity of all the websites in the world. It's not perfect, but it at least gives a good indication of the traffic levels we're seeing. And if you look at that, and you look at any of the main Bitcoin sites, whether it's Coinbase, Blockchain.info, CoinDesk, any of those sites and companies like that have been around for relatively long time, the traffic levels have declined pretty much very, very significantly throughout the year. And most of them are, I would say, they've probably lost like 50% of the traffic or something since January, right? Now, I think that if you track that, compare that with the price, that's very much very much correlated. So I think that's been interesting to watch. So I think a lot of these media sites you're talking about, media endeavors you're talking about, they were started like we started it at the height, right, where everybody was excited about it. This is a big opportunity, and I think for the most part it hasn't lived up yet, right? But of course we believe, and many others believe, that it will come. So you keep doing it. But and of course some of them didn't, right? So I may also stop, but I guess that's just normal.
No, but I think like the price, we've seen a leveling off of Bitcoin-specific media, and sort of the cream has risen to the top. And I mean, in terms of blogs, we can identify perhaps 4 or 5, maybe 6 blogs that are kind of top of mind that people will be able to cite, people in the space anyway, as sort of go-to places for Bitcoin news, and podcasts as well. There's sort of with a good example is in Amsterdam, there was the blockchain awards, and they actually had a podcast category. Well, before like in the year previous, we wouldn't have been able to have a podcast category because there was one podcast. So
I mean, I think another thing that sort of very much tracks into that is the conference space. And I think it was very similar in the conference space, right? There was basically, in the first half of 2013, there was like 1 conference or 2 conferences. There was the San Diego conference by the Bitcoin Foundation. And then in the fall, there were some conferences. I went to my first Bitcoin conference in the fall 2013 in Amsterdam. It was a great conference. Also pretty much full, sold out. A lot of enthusiasm, right? Price going up. Everybody was starting conferences. You started having conferences. You had like a conference every weekend. Constantly there was a conference somewhere. And I think what I've seen is that those haven't done very well, right? Like a lot of them have been empty. They have had difficulty selling their sponsorships. So I would say, and I mean, I know personally a few people organizing conferences that have had this experience. And now if you look at the fall conferences, I think there's not that much, right? This fall, I think there has been a decrease from before, and there's definitely something similar going on there, right? There was a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of people got into this space. I mean, I was actually also thinking of putting on a conference at one point. I'm very glad that I didn't get into this.
Yeah, so was I.
And that's totally leveled off, because and that sort of tracks also one of our topics, is that adoption just hasn't kept up with what expectations have been.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We definitely saw explosive growth in conferences, but whether they're profitable or of any interest, because I mean, a lot of these conferences, I mean, you look at the speaker list, it's just always the same people, right? So if you get 10 conferences in the year and you're seeing the same talks and seeing the same people, I mean, I think this is something we talked about at some point as well. Is what are our goals when we're going to conferences? Is it to produce content? Is it to meet people? And I think when you're choosing a conference to go to, you really have to think of that and evaluate whether it will be profitable for you to go there. Whether you'll get a return on whether you'll get a return. I wouldn't say profitable, but if you'll get the return on your investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, just briefly, I wanted to talk about meetups, because we both have meetups, and we haven't really talked about it in a long time. I'd like to get your feedback on the Berlin meetup in the last year.
Yeah, so I started when I got into Bitcoin when I was living in Berlin. There were 2 existing meetups. One was a meetup at Room 77, which is the first physical location to accept Bitcoin in 2011. It's a restaurant, a bar, owned by Jörg Platzer. And there was also a Bitcoin exchange, which is sort of a Satoshi Square thing, which was once a month, and it did have a short talk, like 10 minutes or something usually. And so I wanted to have a meetup that's really focused on building companies, getting people together, really having content and that sort of stuff. So I started Bitcoin Startups Berlin meetup in, I think it was like October 2013. And it was very well received from the beginning. We had like, I think, 35 people at our first meetup. It was, of course, also at the sort of when you just started having the price going up, and there was a lot of enthusiasm at the time, and you really felt that. Like the atmosphere was very clear that, you know, we are onto something big, sort of thing. And our meetup has done well. You know, I mean, I think it's been a great group. We have meetups every 2 weeks, and we have usually between 3 and 4, 5, sometimes even talks. We've had a lot of great people giving talks, and today we have about 450 members on Meetup. And if you talk about the actual attendance of our meetups, it's actually not that different from when we started out. It's still about, I would say, 40 people. We have had a few bigger ones. So we've had up to maybe 100 people at some occasions. But I think it's been a great experience. So and it's been lots of fun and very valuable to do it. And I think it has served a good purpose in getting the community together in Berlin. But,
how many have you done so far?
Oh, I'm just on that. We have done 32.
Wow. Okay. And you do it every 2 weeks?
Yeah, we do it every 2 weeks, basically. Yeah.
Mm. Well, that's slightly contrast to my experience here. I mean, I started the meetup just after you, so I guess in January I did my first one, and we've had 5. I had a few months hiatus. The community in Lille, I mean, it's definitely not as a big city like Berlin, so but it is a very there's a big tech community here. There are many tech startups and tech incubators. So I was expecting more people to come in, but I've really had to kind of grab people and tell them to come and check it out. We've got about 100 people in the meetup group, and so I'm rebooting it for January. So my first one this year will be in at the end of January. I haven't had one since, I mean, really since like May of this year. And what I found the most challenging is getting people to do talks. For a long time, it was just me and 2 other guys, and sometimes like 1 other person doing talks. But I've really had a hard time getting people to sort of be empowered and tackle a subject. So what I've done for January is I've gone and just grabbed people from Paris, entrepreneurs, and said, like, you know, come on over. And so we'll have Richard Catano on, for instance, from Handshake. We'll have the founder of the Yallet wallet and a guy who works for Paymium. And, you know, the response that I've got from that, I mean, like, lots of people signed up for it. So I'm hoping that this will sort of give people the drive to want to do talks. And I've talked to other people here in town that do meetups, like web design meetups and things like that, and they tell me, like, if nobody wants to propose a talk, we just don't do one. So maybe that's the right approach.
Yeah, that's certainly one way to do it, right? You just have social meetups. In Berlin, it hasn't been a problem generally getting talks. I mean, because we have like a lot of meetups. It has sometimes been the case that I could only find like 1 person to give a talk or something versus like 3 that maybe we'd like to have, at least 2. And sometimes if I had to run after people and like email them, but in general it has been pretty good. And there's some people have also sort of gone that when Johan Barbie of 37 Coins was still in Berlin, he was giving a talk every meetup. And I've given a lot of talk myself. And a few other people have also given a lot of talks. So that's been definitely something that it's just also something, you can take on any topic, get into it, and give a talk about it. And, you know, I've done a lot of times to take 1 day to learn about the topic and, you know, for example, give a talk on Ethereum or something like that. But that's definitely, I'm sure that's a challenge if you have a smaller community and maybe not as many active people. But before we get into our first topic, we want to briefly talk about our sponsor, Gems here. So let's put up the logo. So Gems, I think many of you have heard about it. Gems is a social messaging app. We have had Daniel Pallet, the CEO, on a few weeks ago. It was a very interesting episode, and I encourage you to check it out. So Gems, the way I like to think about Gems is that it's a bit like WhatsApp, but it has a cryptocurrency aspect to it. So it has its built-in cryptocurrency, and the cryptocurrency is used for a few things. First of all, it's sold in a crowd sale, and that sale is still going on today. So if you want to get involved in that, we'll tell you the URL where you can go to at the end. So the crowd sale serves to raise funds to build the app. That's one thing. It also gives people a stake in the project. So we've brought some gems. So we are like invested in the project. We want it to succeed. And if it does succeed, then the tokens we've bought, they will appreciate in value. And a third thing it's used for is that gems will be used to incentivize users. So for example, let's take Facebook as an example. We have some power users on Facebook that have thousands of friends, post all the time, invite new people, and you can really say that they've played a big role in making Facebook a success.
And not to mention brands too. They have like hundreds of thousands of followers.
Exactly, right. But I think brands, they tend to have a monetary interest to try to get people off. But a lot of people, if you talk about users, they don't have a monetary interest. All they do is they really increase the value of the platform. And Facebook now being worth, I don't know, 50 billion or whatever it is, they haven't gotten anything for that. So what the Gems currency can do is it can incentivize people for that, right? So you can say, you do a lot to increase the value of the network, increase the value of the platform, we reward you. And that's something I think that has a huge potential, and that's why I think it has a big shot of actually becoming a big success.
I have to say I actually have it on my phone.
Yeah.
Daniel allowed me to get the beta version, and so this actually comes out on January 30th, I think, for iPhone and Android. I've been using it, and I gotta say it's really, really cool. The interface.
Is there what about the iPhone? Is there a beta for that yet?
Well, I think just from a technical perspective, it's a bit harder to get people in on an iPhone beta because you need to sort of add them in the developer platform. He just sent me the APK for the Android version.
Okay.
So the cool thing about this is that it works with Telegram. So Telegram is an open source messaging platform. There's 50 million users. So if you have Telegram, or if your friends have Telegram, they'll show up in your list, and vice versa.
Yeah. So.
Now a couple of cool things about this. So they've integrated the wallet. So for example, like if you see here, like I've got 123 gems, and I can tap it, and it says that I've got 0.003 bitcoins. And when you're in a conversation with someone, you just type like 100 gems, and
it sends it straight away.
And then it sends it the gems. So I'll show you. Okay, I should probably delete clear history. So I'm just typing in 100 gems. All right, so I've got it here, 100 gems, and then I could press this little gems button down here, and it would send the gems. So the integration of the wallet is really well done. Like that's really cool. And they've got so encrypted chat as well, so you can begin an encrypted chat with someone, initiate it, and all the messages are encrypted end to end, and you can even set like time limits. So a bit like Snapchat, but for messaging. So you can say like my messages only last 10 seconds, and then they get deleted. So that's really cool too.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a cool project, and that's another thing that I'm excited about, and that's also sort of the project that Daniel talked about that motivated them, was that they want to really bring cryptocurrencies to a wider audience, and this is something that could do it. And I think has a good shot at doing it. And of course, the cool thing is that the potential is just so big, right? Because even if you think of Coinbase having like 2 million users at most, right? I mean, 2 million wallets probably means like more like 1 million users or something. And if you think of like a company like WhatsApp having 500 million users or something like that, you don't have to get very far. Only if you get like 5% as good as WhatsApp, right? 5% as far as WhatsApp. That's still a huge number of new big cryptocurrency users. So that's an exciting thing. Now, so they've raised about 2,000 bitcoins, I think a bit more. So if you want to, so I think the sale's going on for like about another week.
Till January 5th.
January 5th, yeah. So if you want to back the project and purchase some tokens, you can do so at Coinify. So that's koinify.com, and then you will see it, gems. And you can also check out the app at getgems.org. So yeah, please do so, check it out. And I'm certainly excited until I have the version as well, and I can send Sebastien some gems.
And thanks a lot to Gems for the support of Epicenter Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. So back to our episode. Now we have the first kind of proper topic. Now we're already kind of in. So the first topic we wanted to talk about was regulation. Now we've talked about regulation quite a few times on this podcast. It's been a big topic, although not so much in the last 3 months. I think at some point regulation is going to become less important. At some point we're going to stop talking about regulation because it's sort of established, right? Like we know what people have to do. It's going to become a boring subject at some point. It's not right now, right? It's so important right now, and it has such a huge influence on where things are going. And so if we, in my view, if we look at the sort of current state of regulation, right? There are two main jurisdictional areas that matter. The first one is the United States. The second one is Europe. Now, a bit simplifying, of course, Canada matters, and the rest of the world also to some extent. But,
yes, Canada matters.
But those are by far the most important, right? So what's going to happen in the US and in Europe is going to have a big influence on the rest of the world. And it's also just going to have a big influence because a lot of Bitcoin companies are there, right? The most Bitcoin companies are either in the US or in Europe. So in my view, in the EU, there's one thing that sort of looms above everything, which is this VAT case. So the question is, do you have to charge VAT on the sale of Bitcoin? So let's say, for example, there is a company called Safello in Sweden. It's like Coinbase. You can give them, you can buy 300 euros worth of Bitcoin from them. So the question is, do they have to charge you VAT on that and then give that money to the government? Now, if that's the case, it is total disaster. It is a disaster on so many fronts. It makes everything a mess. It especially makes a mess of accepting Bitcoin as a payment for companies. It essentially becomes impossible. And it's not clear which way that's going to go. And in some countries, like the UK, they've said there's no VAT. And in other countries, like Sweden, for example, they said VAT should be charged. And now the EU Court of Justice is going to decide that. We don't know exactly when, but it's probably going to be reasonably soon, probably 2015, I would guess. And that's going to determine a lot of things. So that's really the one thing I think that's looming in Europe. That's going to be, it could be a big threat to Bitcoin. It could really have a huge negative effect, and it's something that people aren't so aware of, I think. I was just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago or something, at a workshop in Berlin about founding a cryptocurrency bank with Fedor and some other people. Crain were there. So about 30 people talking about how we could go about funding a cryptocurrency bank. And this, for example, is a topic that was not really talked about. People aren't totally aware of it. But it's so important. It could totally destroy this project. And it could destroy so much with Bitcoin in Europe. So that's looming there. We don't know where it's going to go. But it's a big dark cloud in the sky. And then the other, in the US, we have the big license thing, right? So we've talked about the license as well. There has been some update. I think Benjamin Losky has said that they've made some clarifications about what it will look like, and I think they're positive clarifications. So before there were some rules that were just totally crazy, like for example that every Bitcoin bit license company, so basically everyone who sort of transacts with Bitcoin or holds Bitcoin for someone else, they have to know every party to every transaction. So that means a wallet provider would have to prevent you from sending Bitcoins to some unknown address because they don't know the party of that transaction, right? Totally crazy. It would totally destroy Bitcoin. Fortunately, they've gotten rid of that, or they have announced that they will get rid of that. And they've done some other good changes. So we haven't yet seen the results, but I'm reasonably optimistic there that they will be at least semi-reasonable, and they will allow at least the well-funded companies and some people to actually provide good Bitcoin products in the US. And I think it may well be likely that other states are going to take on or take over this bit license thing. But even if not, companies will have to cooperate with it because otherwise they can't have New York customers, which is also a pain. So those are kind of the things that stand out to me. This VAT case and the bit license thing, and they're really important. And I think 2015 is going to determine a lot. I think we will know a lot more at the end of the year how feasible the regulatory environment will be. How much it will allow cryptocurrencies to blossom.
I'm curious, what do you think has the potential to be most harmful to Bitcoin? The VAT case, for instance, the European court defining that VAT must be charged on Bitcoin, or the propositions of bit license?
I
think it's the VAT case.
Absolutely. I think the bit license stuff is, while annoying and a pain, etc., etc., I mean, it's a problem. I don't think it's as big of a problem as the VAT case. I think the VAT case, if VAT is charged, that would just be really, really, really bad.
But you can't help it. But also, I mean, my way of thinking of this is, I mean, if that doesn't go through, that there's no way that the regulators are not aware that this will kill the ecosystem.
Well, they don't care. Right? First of all, this is not the regulators, right? This is the justice system interpreting the existing law. It's not like someone making new law. They're saying like, hey, this is Bitcoin thing. Where does it fit in our existing VAT tax law? Well, it should be in that category. Hence, VAT needs to be charged. So these are not people coming up with new regulatory frameworks for Bitcoin. So far, I don't think there is really an initiative to do that in Europe. But they don't care if Bitcoin is going to have a problem. They don't care if some companies will have to get out of Europe or close shop, etc. I honestly don't think Bitcoin has the weight, the prominence, the mind share for people to really take that into account. I may be wrong about this. Maybe they do.
No, I think you're right. I think that there is definitely not the mind share. There's definitely not the weight or lobbying power or anything of that. I mean.
So, yeah, one more thing to mention on this is that in this court case, different countries could submit their positions, right? So Sweden submitted their position. They said VAT should be charged on Bitcoin. And other countries could sort of also put in their positions because in the end, what they decide is going to apply European-wide. And the only countries that have submitted their stance on this issue have been Germany and Estonia, and both countries have said yes, VAT should be charged. There hasn't been a single country that has said no, it should be exempt, or no, this is too important of a technology industry, we don't want to scare startups away. Nobody has taken this position in front of the court. I mean, the only one who can take that position is the guy who's actually doing the lawsuit, the Swedish guy. But no country, no official government authority has taken that position. So, yeah, it certainly is occasion to worry about, but I guess we will see where this goes.
We might be out of jobs in a few months.
Oh, and one more thing on the regulatory front that I think is going to be very interesting to watch is the whole issue of crowd sales. So there was recently a CoinDesk article I don't know how much attention it got, but I think it's kind of a big story in a sense. So some guy had some Bitcoin exchange and he sold, let me pull this up, Bitcoin Trading Corp or something like that. It doesn't really matter that much. But this guy sold some sort of crypto shares for Bitcoin, and now he got a fine, which was equivalent to like all the profits he ever made with his company plus $10,000 or something like that. Pretty hefty fine, right? So the question is, to what extent are these crowd sales legal? Like if you talk about, for example, Ethereum or the thing Swarm have done, or some of those things, it's worrying, right? We certainly hope this should be legal, but it's kind of unclear. And it's unclear to what extent the SEC is going to go after people who have organized crowd sales. So that's definitely something that worries me, and that probably worries a lot of people. And I think we don't know where it's going to go. And of course, the line is sort of, you're not allowed to sell shares, but you are allowed to sell products. So, and with some of the things we're talking about here, let's say Ether for Ethereum's currency, the lines are sort of blurred. Is it a product or is it a share, or is it? I mean, it's not technically a share. It doesn't pay dividends, but it's also, maybe one could say it's a share. Some people treat it as if it was a share. So it's something else to worry about, and I don't know where this is going to go, but it
No,
would be.
I think that, you know, if 2014 the states have started being aware of Bitcoin and thinking of ways they might be able to regulate or at least fit it into existing regulation, 2015, I think we'll see more of that focus on dApps. Now, I guess the next phase of that is when we start getting into regulated professions. So take, for example, and that's already happening now with just like the regular financial system, or the regular startup ecosystem with companies like Uber, Airbnb, being confronted with existing regulation with regards to regulated professions. You know, when you have the ride-sharing service, the Bitcoin ride-sharing service, or the Bitcoin version of Airbnb, or the Bitcoin version of God knows what other regulated profession, then you start getting into like a whole other area of regulation that, you know, has like lobbies and, you know, powerful groups that are protecting their interests. So
absolutely, I think, no, you're totally right. The whole dApps issue is going to bring up a whole other host of questions that people haven't even thought about yet, and that I think regulators and law enforcement have like literally no clue about. So I think to some extent this may become a topic next year. But
just look at like proof of existing protocols, like Factum, for example. You know,
well, Factum maybe.
What will notary services think of that?
I think Factum is not so. Wait, what's going on here?
I think we lost your video.
Yeah. I think Factum is not. Oh. I don't know what's going on here.
Do you want to just refresh the page? Oh, there you go. Okay, now we can't hear you though. We're experiencing some technical difficulties. Please stand by. Can't hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you. Wave your hand if you can hear me.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And you're back.
Let me see. Just make sure that I'm still recording. Let me.
Yeah, I think you're using your internal mic though.
Yeah, apologies.
Okay, no, you're back. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but recording stopped. Let me pull this up. Okay. Yeah, so I think Factum is not like probably not going to be that controversial. I think other areas are going to be much more But yeah, will be very interesting, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think I suspect it's probably more going to become an issue maybe 2016 or something. Like when those dApps actually start getting a lot of users, because probably next year is still going to be like people developing things, people figuring out the user experience, people doing all those things. Maybe you start having some users, but I personally kind of doubt that we will see kind of breakthrough dApps, especially if you talk something like Uber, like complicated things. Um, but yeah, afterwards, yeah, definitely going to be interesting.
So moving on to the next topic, adoption. So we've sort of seen the thing with adoption is there's a divergence in incentives. So we've seen strong merchant adoption in the last year. I mean, strong, reasonably strong merchant adoption with large merchants starting to accept Bitcoin, Microsoft, Overstock, Tiger Direct. There have been some big stories of merchant adoption, but user adoption has been sort of weak. I guess one thing that you can attribute to that is that there's a strong incentive for merchants to start accepting Bitcoin because for them it allows them to gain new customers potentially. We're still sort of in this period where there's a novelty aspect to it, which will get you, all the like publicity and everything, and potentially new users within the Bitcoin community. However, for new users entering the space, or even outside of the space, there's very little incentive because for them it doesn't cost them anything to use a credit card, whereas the costs are usually taken by the merchant. So the incentives haven't been aligned there so far. I think there are a couple of things that will sort of change this. One of the ways that companies are trying to bring new users into the ecosystem are projects like Gems, right? So creating an altcoin which has an actual use case within an application. One other interesting area that we've been looking at, or we've been closely looking at, is change tips. So I don't think this has the same sort of impact as a product like Gems for the time being. I think it's mostly used within the Bitcoin ecosystem, people tipping each other. Once you start to see sort of widespread tipping, where people with Bitcoin are tipping people that don't use Bitcoin, and
I think that's happening, definitely.
That's happening, but I don't know to what extent it's happening. I think there's I think apps will play a large role. So we may see other apps enter the space, like other messaging apps, like Gems, for instance, or cloud storage. That's another space that is due to be disrupted, and where people have a strong incentive to use the currency. So those are two areas where I think in the developed world we might see an increase in users. Remittances, well, it's a little unclear, right? We really thought that remittances were going to take off in 2014. At least I really thought that this would be the case. Hasn't really turned out that way so far. I guess there hasn't really been a strong increase in adoption in those countries where we send the most of our remittance payments. So it's hard for people sending money there to change their money back into local currency. So that has been a barrier. Some companies are trying to change that.
But yeah, I mean, I think you phrased it correctly. So the main basic challenge is that today, if you talk to your grandmother about Bitcoin, or to your parents about Bitcoin, some random person about Bitcoin, especially if you're in the US or if you're in Europe or some place like that, you cannot give them very strong reasons to use Bitcoin. I mean, there are a few, right? So one is buying drugs on these dark markets. That's just something you need Bitcoin for, and if you are interested in that kind of product, it makes sense to actually go out and buy Bitcoins and do it like that, because you don't have to go out and meet some guy, etc. So you actually have a strong reason there. And I think the other strong reason, the main reason actually, has been speculation, right? People buy Bitcoins because they think it's going to succeed, and then the value is going to increase and they're going to get rich, right? So I think that's absolutely the number. Those are the main reasons. Then you also have maybe some ideological reasons, like I love this independence and like money free from the government, that kind of thing. So some people are drawn by that. So if you have those three reasons, they tend not to be enough to. They tend not to be the right reasons to sort of get the broad mass of people. The broad mass of people don't want to speculate in some like weird currency they've never heard of. They don't want to buy drugs on dark markets, and they're not ideologically driven that they're like, oh, I want to have this new currency without the government. So the question is, then how do we get them to take Bitcoin, right? How do we get them to start using Bitcoin? Right? That's a real challenge, I think. And yeah, change tip can be something, I think, possible. Gems could be that start using that, right? Payments, I think once you set up, for example, paying online is actually kind of more convenient with Bitcoin than with credit card. It's entering all those details. Now, the problem is it's not enough more convenient to make sense to like go out and get some Bitcoins just to buy things online. But at least it's a small advantage, and maybe over time this can become a bigger advantage. Let's say if it's integrated in your bank account and you can automatically buy Bitcoins and then you pay and it repurchases so you don't have to worry about the volatility or something like that, then maybe you could say, like, I'm going to start using some Bitcoin even if I don't care. Then there's developing countries.
I think one interesting space we've talked about before, but haven't really looked at as a plausible means to bring sort of lots of people into the space is this idea of using cryptocurrency as fidelity points. So, say for example, an existing brand creates a fidelity loyalty
like
program.
Loyalty,
yeah, right, a loyalty program. Sorry, I'm using the French word. And they use cryptocurrency to do this, and then they start advertising that on TV. Think of Facebook and Twitter back in like 2005, 2006, when brands started using social media and started advertising on TV, like TV commercials, like follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook. I think this sort of brought on awareness of social media to the general public and sort of bringing it down to the common denominator. I think when brands start utilizing cryptocurrencies in this way for some sort of like new innovative fidelity program, that might be one of the ways that we'll see an increase in using crypto.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's an interesting use case, and I think, yeah, I think that's very likely that it will actually happen at some point, right? The question is when, but yeah, I think that's actually not quite feasible that right now companies and that's something, if we talk about adoption, that's actually sort of surprised me, because I had expected that user adoption would sort of be faster than merchant adoption. I really thought that there would first have to be a significant user base before a company like Microsoft would say, oh, we start taking Bitcoin. That's been totally the opposite way. It really surprises me. It makes sense if you think about the incentives, right? Like them having the payment fees and also them sort of thinking ahead more. But yeah, I think it's not far-fetched to think that like, oh, now Microsoft or Dell, or the best example of this is Reddit, right? So Reddit is planning to have its own cryptocurrencies that will be backed or something along those lines by Reddit stock, so that people can actually sort of, valuable Reddit users get rewarded, and if Reddit succeeds, they get some money, and like that kind of thing is cool, really innovative. And I think if that we may start seeing, we might start seeing on a much broader level, and that could actually make a big difference. I agree. And I guess the one last thing sort of in adoption that will be interesting to see in 2015 is, or as at least I've been thinking about this quite a bit, is the whole question of the financial sector. So we've talked about this with Daniel Galancy in a podcast about SolidX. His company is essentially tackling that problem. So right now, for example, if you invest your retirement money, you can't buy Bitcoins. But maybe you could say it actually would make sense to put in, let's say, 0.5% of your retirement fund in Bitcoin, because maybe it works out and it would be worth a lot, right? And if it doesn't, you don't lose a lot. So that kind of role as an asset, as an investment asset, hasn't happened yet, but it could happen soon, right? I think the Winklevoss ETF is one aspect, one tool that could make that possible. And if it does happen, that's not going to lead to a ton new users, but I think it could lead to a ton new sort of indirect Bitcoin owners, and it could lead to an increase in price. And I think that could indirectly have a really big impact on Bitcoin as well. And perhaps that's going to happen. I think I'm actually pretty optimistic that this will be something in 2015.
Yeah, so to sum up, there isn't like one area where which can drive adoption. There are sort of multiple areas that are pulling people into the space. Very different people, and yeah, I guess we'll see which ones are most effective.
Right, it's very much an open question. I think how, because there are so many different angles, right? This can happen. There's this sort of increase in adoption, driving adoption, and we just don't know where it's gonna occur.
I think in contrast with last year, we were sort of expecting adoption, but not really knowing what were the levers, what would cause that adoption to occur. Now I think we're seeing more of the pieces of the puzzle kind of falling into place, and yeah. So like I said, there are multiple areas where adoption could grow. So shall we move on to our next topic?
Totally, yeah.
dApps and Bitcoin 2.0. I don't know about you. I don't like the term Bitcoin 2.0. Although my Twitter handle is Sep 2.0, I hate when people use 2.0 to define something new and innovative.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, I think it sort of works in terms that like people understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it definitely has its flaws, the term.
So, I mean, if we look at the Bitcoin 2.0 space, there have been multiple developments in the last year. We've definitely seen an increase in the amount of protocols building on top of Bitcoin, and I mean, some of those have sort of died off, I guess you could say. Some have taken more prevalence. Counterparty has definitely developed into this kind of huge platform for crowdfunding. Ethereum has had their crowd sale, and a very successful crowd sale. I mean, in the history of crowd sales, like Indiegogo, Kickstarter, everything, it's in second place, according to this article we found on Wikipedia. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive when you think about it. And there also have been many real feasible use cases for dApps. So we've mentioned a few of them already: storage, Factom, and gems are among those use cases. Now, where is this all going? One area that I see really developing in the last year, in the next year, is interoperability between these dApps. So what that means is the ability to, I mean, I think these dApps will develop on top of their existing platform APIs, which will allow them to operate together in a decentralized way, so that, for example, I mean, you can use gems to send a message to, say, Factom to embed some sort of information into the blockchain. Perhaps also using, I mean, I'm using examples that we have so far, but Factom having an API which allows you to send proof of existence from send a file from storage into Factom chain so that you can have proof of existence. So I think these are the types of things that we'll see develop in the next year: interoperability. Also, one thing that I think, coming back to adoption, that's very important and that will definitely grow awareness of decentralized applications and cryptocurrencies in general is seeing more dApps in app stores. So I think when Gems enters the app store, if it is successful, if it does gain traction, having a dApp in the app store is one big step to gaining more users. There are many app stores. There's the Apple iPhone and iPad app store. There's the Play Store. There's the Mac OS store. I think there's also a Windows store. So if we have visibility in those app stores, that will definitely help increase adoption and increase awareness in cryptocurrencies in general. Crowd sales is also an important area to be looking at. So we have seen multiple crowd sales this year and many successful ones. Ethereum is definitely probably the most successful, and there are others that have proven to be successful. This model is being we're sort of proving that this model can exist and that it is successful. That we don't have to go through platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. That we can create a product and start a company and build it entirely on crypto and run a crowd sale without having to go through any platform, and sort of just run our own marketing. And I think that will grow in the next year. Now, will we see? I guess now what we have to be careful of is sort of identifying good crowd sales and bad crowd sales. Now that we've seen this model work and we've been able to test it and see that it's actually effective, some people will probably try to take advantage of that and create scam coins. So
yeah,
I guess,
so
building reputation around a product is sort of an important component to being able to start a crowd sale.
yeah, no, I think it will be very interesting, and of course, Ethereum launch is going to be a big thing. I think. Well, I don't think we will see yet. Probably in the next year, actually Ethereum apps. I mean, people will develop them, but probably not to the point where people actually, use Ethereum apps on their iPhones and stuff. But it would be very interesting to see how it's received in the developing community, people on developing cryptocurrency apps, and to what extent it competes with counterparty and things like that. And I do think that, the crowd sales you were mentioning, that definitely is a model that just works. It just makes a lot of sense for this, and I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, a lot of people criticize it, but it just makes so much sense. So, is there something else you want to cover regarding dApps?
Well, I think the next logical applications of dApps, well, I mean, there's one I think that we'll see be tackled in 2015, perhaps 2016, is Wi-Fi sharing. So we've started to see storage or cloud storage be applied to dApps. Messaging, proof of existence, Wi-Fi sharing. I think is an interesting area that we will start to see being addressed by startups, and maybe carpooling. I don't think Uber style ride sharing, but perhaps carpooling would be an interesting area to decentralize, because it is really a peer-to-peer economy. So I think all of the existing incumbents of the peer-to-peer economy are sort of up next, if you will, in terms of models that need to be decentralized, that will be decentralized. I think if we start getting out of the software space, the first ones that will be decentralized are probably carpooling or Airbnb. I think there have actually been examples of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the whole sharing economy business models are very interesting to think about. How they will turn out if you start integrating Bitcoin or start building them. I think rather than integrating Bitcoin, if you start sort of building them as decentralized applications, as things with its own token sort of baked into it. Just very briefly, we've had some questions in the Q&A, and I suggest we cover those very briefly.
Sure.
So Anna Kurt, so she is running one of the other meetups in Berlin. She's running a meetup for girls or for women. So I think it's one of the only ones to do that, and she does, I think, once a month, and it's very successful too. So she was asking So she's feeling that a lot of meetup organizers put a lot of energy in it and are running out of power after a year or 6 months running it. So what about personal experiences? I think, Sebastien, it did sound a little bit like this was your experience, maybe to some extent, right? With your difficulties finding people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was running like a quantified self meetup, for example, if I'd be experiencing the same thing. But yeah, it's been my experience that it's been hard to find speakers, at least people in my community that have been willing to speak. Like I really have to get after them.
Yeah, so I mean, personally, I would say I mean, it is sometimes tiring, especially because somehow I haven't been able to find someone else who wants to sort of, be a co-organizer and actually like be sort of engaged with it. So it can sometimes be a bit tiring to do it, every 2 weeks because it's a big frequency. But overall, I think it hasn't been a big issue because, first of all, I think it's just pure luck by being in Berlin where there is a strong Bitcoin community already. It makes everything much, much easier. And the other thing is because I think I'm going to be doing cryptocurrency things for years to come. So I'm not so discouraged. I have a very long view as well. So I think that all the effort putting in now is something that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
So Anna also mentioned, other meetup posts having decreasing numbers. Yeah, I can definitely see that happening. And so recipe for hosting a successful meetup. I think meetup.com is great. It works, especially when it's used. I recently met some guy from Liechtenstein, and he wanted to start a Bitcoin meetup there. He came to Berlin and sort of, I met up with him, and the problem there is nobody uses meetup, right? So you have to find different ways. But if people use meetup in your place, you can put up a meetup group, and people tend to just enroll because they get notified, oh, here's a new meetup. And over time, you have a certain number of people, you can launch a meetup, and I think that works well. And then I do think probably if you don't have speakers, it would probably make sense to just do it like monthly drinks meetup. Sebastien, I would probably do that if I was you.
Yeah.
And then have speakers as whenever there are speakers. Because I think people in Berlin, for example, they really appreciate the monthly drinks meetup at Room 77. It's popular, it works well, it's been there forever, and it's no effort to organize, right? All you have to do is put in the meetup event. You don't even have to go there yourself as the meetup organizer. It's really unstructured, and I think that's it's a good thing. Yeah, so the other question is the smart contracts. I think we sort of addressed that. I think we are pretty far away from having dApps, Ethereum apps on the phone and all that kind of stuff. I think that's going to probably take longer than people think. So I think with that, should we do the
Sure. So before we move on to our next topic, we'd like to talk about Shapeshift. So I mean, when you buy Bitcoin for the first time, there are all these roadblocks, right? You have to. I mean, the interoperability between fiat currency and Bitcoin is known to be complicated, but I think most people expect that when we have Bitcoin, it shouldn't be hard to get other currencies. Once you're in there, and that's still very hard. I mean, up until recently, it was still fairly complex to buy Litecoin from Bitcoin or sell Dogecoin for Litecoin, etc., because you still have to deal with exchanges. And exchanges, in most cases, will ask for you to create an account, will ask for you to prove your identity, you'll have to place an order, wait for the order to be fulfilled. That takes a long time, and it's not easy. It's not the best way to do it. The best way to get altcoins is to use Shapeshift. So Shapeshift is at shapeshift.io, and the way to think about this is Google Translate for cryptocurrencies. And I really love this. I really love this analogy. Actually, Alan Scott kind of coined this in one of our recent episodes, and so I'm going to show you exactly how Shapeshift works. If I could just share my screen here. We're having a hard time with the Hangout today, aren't we, Brian?
Indeed.
Okay, so screen share is not working. Well, that's a shame. Okay. So anyways, so shapeshift.io, it's very simple. You go to shapeshift.io, and basically you see like a Google Translate sort of thing, where on one side you've got the currency that you want to convert, and on the other side you've got the currency that you want to convert to. So for example, let's say we want to convert Bitcoin into Dogecoin. We set the amount, so we'll say we want 1,000 Doge or 10,000 Doge or whatever, and then you put your Dogecoin address, you hit start, and then Shapeshift will show you a QR code and an amount. So you use your mobile wallet, you scan the QR code, you send the amount to their address, and they take care of the rest. In about 20 seconds, the Dogecoin is transferred onto your account. There's no sign-ups required. You don't even have to give them your email address, and it's just really, really easy and simple to use. So
I have it.
oh, you there you go. So this is what it looks like. I don't think we have time to do a demo now, but yeah, it's really like Google Translate.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different, they've added a few more coins.
Yeah, they recently added Bitcoin Dark, Quark, what are the other ones? Paycoin and Redcoin. I have no idea what these are, but they must be significant if Shapeshift has added them to their list of cryptocurrencies. And who knows, maybe one day you'll be able to buy app coins on this, like Ether, or Gems, or Storage Coin.
Totally. I think that's one thing I'm actually excited. I think there are a few things in the future that are exciting about this, right? But yeah, I think having crowd sales on there. Another thing is, and we've actually been thinking about doing something like that. Well, one thing is cool. They have this browser plugin. So if you, let's say you're on a site, like for example our site, and there is a Bitcoin donation address, with the Shapeshift browser plugin, it can pull it up, and you can donate, let's say, Dogecoin to that Bitcoin address, and then Shapeshift on the back, trades the Dogecoin for Bitcoin and send the Bitcoin equivalent of those Dogecoins to that address. So that's really cool, right? Because you can essentially use Dogecoin or some other currency that they have, and you can pay with it instead of Bitcoin on a variety of sites. And Shapeshift sort of does the. It's a bit like BitPay, right? So with BitPay, you pay with Bitcoin and people get euros. Well, with Shapeshift, you can do it on your end, and you can pay with Dogecoin and the people get Bitcoin, right? So I think that's really cool, right? Because it really opens up the usage of altcoins, and you can say, oh, I prefer some altcoin, and then you can keep using it.
So yeah, so head over to shapeshift.io, give it a try, tell us what you think, and we want to thank Shapeshift for their support of Epicenter Bitcoin.
Yeah, security. Tell us about security, Sebastien.
Well, I mean, security is an interesting topic because there are two areas of security we can look at. We can look at security of the network, and we can look at user security, and to a certain extent, user security kind of overlaps into security of Bitcoin startups. I guess I'm more interested in the user security side. So what we've seen in the last year, if we look back at our first episode in January of last year, when we were looking at sort of where the Bitcoin storage was going to go, at the time the only real option to store your Bitcoins, I guess in an easy and semi-secure way, was to store them in an exchange. If you didn't want to have to deal with paper wallets and things like that, and at the time, our predictions were that hardware wallets would sort of prevail as the sort of best practice standard way to secure your Bitcoins. There have been multiple hardware wallets that come out in the last year, and we've seen the Trezor wallet. The French company Ledger just released their smart card wallet, and that is still a viable option. It's definitely a very secure option, but I think it still remains sort of a technical. A very high-tech way for the sort of like the, really hardcore enthusiast that really wants to keep his own keys and, the tech-savvy guy. I don't think that's accessible to most people. What we have seen emerge in the last couple months, and a lot of companies have started doing this. We've seen BitGo, Coinbase, and other companies like CoinKite is start developing really simple and easy to use multi-sig options. I think Armory and Electrum, desktop wallets are also doing multi-sig now. And what multi-sig sort of tackles is the security ease of use trade-off. So you have the security, I guess sort of you could say as high a security as having a paper wallet or a hardware wallet, or even more secure because you have 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5 keys, and you have ease of use. So if you look at companies like BitGo, like their solution is really easy to use. You've got they hold one key, you hold one key, and then you've got a backup key, and to top it off, you've got two-factor authentication. So it's really secure, but you can use it for day-to-day transactions. So I think many companies have been tackling the security issue and trying to build a user experience and really nice user interfaces around this, so that one can easily set up a secure wallet, hold their own keys in multi-sig, and really be sure that their coins are secure. Now there is a trade-off to that, and the trade-off, I guess, is that as companies develop their own multi-sig platforms, technology, it sort of promotes proprietary technology. One example is that, for example, with BitGo, if you get the premium account, there are some sort of proprietary components to that. If you want to use multiple users, Coinbase does their multi-sig completely differently. Like it's off blockchain multi-sig, and unless you use the advanced features. So I think what we'll see is a lot of companies are going to start offering multi-sig, but either they'll be using a proprietary off-chain multi-sig, where basically your coins are secured.
Multi-sig is always on-chain.
Well, no, that's not true. I mean, if you look at Coinbase, if you take the regular Coinbase multi-sig, I don't think that's on-chain. They just send you two emails to 2 different places. Like if you take the regular non-advanced user basic version of multi-sig on Coinbase, I'm quite sure is off-chain.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
Because you're sending to a regular Bitcoin address. You're not sending to an address.
Yeah, but then it's not multi-sig, right? I mean, multi-sig is very clear.
Right. So then it's not multi-sig.
Right. I mean, they have their wall. I think you have to distinguish, right? So they have their waltzing, which is off-chain, and which is not a multi-sig thing, and that's the thing where you have to authenticate with different devices and that kind of thing,
Right, so you're right. So that's not really multi-sig. It does provide an extra layer of security because it allows you to have multiple signers.
Right.
But it's not a real Bitcoin protocol multi-sig.
Yeah, and then you have the multi-sig, which is just multi-sig. Of course, they still have their proprietary software, but they also have an open source software which you can still use to spend it yourself. So I think it's a nice balance. But yeah, I think overall, right, it has been interesting, right? I think a year ago we thought Trezor was sort of coming out, and then we talked a lot about hardware wallets, and now there has definitely been a lot of development, especially in the multi-sig area. And we did a fairly prediction during our episode with Ariana about the number of Bitcoins that were going to be held in multi-sig addresses. So, of course, you can check that on the blockchain. And that has been going up like crazy. So I think even a year ago it was like 1,000 Bitcoins or something like that. And today it's like 600,000, or I don't know what it currently is, but it has dramatically increased. So if you want to check that out, go to Fairlane and look at the multi-sig prediction. And there's a nice site too. It's p2sh.info.
Yeah.
Yeah. So pay the script hash, which is a technical name for multi-sig. You can look up what the statistics of how many coins are held in multi-sig. Oh, at the moment it's 6%. Wow, that's crazy. I think it was like 1 point something percent when we did the episode with Ariana Simpson, which was just 2 months ago, not very long ago, right? So it has dramatically increased. Yeah, I think 2015. I think those will probably stay the main areas, right? Like we'll have multi-sig, we'll have hardware wallets, and there will be a lot of advances in both. And the main challenges, are user experience, I think. And for hardware wallets, another challenge has been price, right? Because the Trezor has been expensive.
Right.
And I think there are cheap alternatives. I'm sure Trezor could be way, way cheaper if it was mass produced, right? But at the moment, there just isn't a demand for that.
I think one thing that happened in the last year, and definitely we can attribute the Mt. Gox debacle to this, is the general consensus that just having your access to your keys is really, really important, if not mandatory. And we recently had sort of like another scare with blockchain.info that got hacked. Luckily there was a white hat hacker that returned the coins, but that really discouraged me to use blockchain.info, which I think general consensus in the community was that they were quite secure. I think Mt. Gox definitely illustrated that keeping your keys is essential.
Yeah. Well, I think with this, we've sort of come to the end of our main topics now.
Yeah.
So we also wanted to take a few minutes just before we wrap up to talk a little bit about Epicenter Bitcoin. We did do a bit at the beginning. We've been going for a year now. This has been a very time-consuming project. Like we spend a lot of time on that. Like whether it has been producing episodes, developing content, getting guests on, doing research for shows, etc. It's been a lot of fun. I think we are very grateful for everyone listening. We're very grateful for everyone who's been supporting us. Whether it's through tips, through just listening, through leaving reviews, through sending us feedback, through sponsoring us, through being on the show, through sending us questions, suggestions for episodes, to do all those kind of things. So first of all, a big thanks to everyone. So it's been a lot of fun, and I think it has been a great success. We've learned a lot. We've spoken to so many interesting people, and I think it has. We have also been very lucky in this context because I and Sebastien, we didn't know each other when we started this. It was quite randomly that we were two of the only guys who joined this conference call with Adam Levine about doing some episodes, and somehow we decided to do it together, and that has worked out very well.
I think the only criteria, I think we just said, oh yeah, we're both in Europe, let's do it together.
Exactly. That was the amount of research we did before launching into this. So given that, I think it has been a fantastic success.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to people, I recently I was talking to some old colleagues or people that I work with that were entrepreneurs and that were associates, and told them about our adventure. And I said well, I didn't know him when I first met. Like, what? Are you crazy?
Yeah,
know him?
Totally.
No, I met him 3 months later.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I honestly would not recommend this to anyone. I think it's probably a very risky. I think the risks are probably too big. You should do it, but somehow here it worked out. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for next year, we're going to continue working on this, and we have plans to, do a lot, in terms of growing our audience, in terms of improving the quality, improving our brand, improving the quality of whether it's video or audio quality.
Sure. If I could, just before we start getting into next year,
sure.
I'd like to point out sort of the major milestones that I think we've had this year. One thing that I think was a defining factor in our success to produce interesting content was we changed our format. So when we first started, the idea was sort of to create a Twitch-style show where we would cover news and perhaps at some point have regular guests on, who would come on and discuss the news topics with us. And that's really changed since episode 7 or 8, where I don't think consciously, but unconsciously decided to change the format and progressively started just having guests on every week and doing interviews. Now, I'm personally a little skeptical about how that will play out in the future, if we'll be able to keep doing this, just as, at some point, will it become sort of redundant
I don't
to
think
have
so.
startups on all the time? I don't know. I mean, maybe not now, but maybe in a year from now. Or will we have to sort of like branch off into other topics that are still related to crypto but somewhat on the periphery? I guess we'll see. One other major milestone was doing video, which is what we're doing now. I think that was like a pivotal thing. We should have started. I think you agree. We should have started doing this way before. In
Absolutely.
fact,
Also,
we should have
shout
started
out.
doing this at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I would just want to briefly say thanks. And to all those listening, please check out Singularity One-on-One. It's a fantastic podcast, really high quality. He's also done some cryptocurrency episodes. He did one with Vitalik Buterin as well, and one with Andreas Antonopoulos. I was Skyping with him, in the summer or something, and he's like, if I know one thing, it's like do video. So afterwards, I talked with Sebastien. We started doing video, and it has been extremely successful. So it's definitely, absolutely, I think. So if you are listening to this and you're thinking of doing a podcast, definitely do video, do YouTube as well. So that's definitely one of the lessons we've learned, and we're very excited about this going forward, because we are seeing, I think most of our growth is from video.
Yeah. So speaking of growth, I mean, we haven't really set objectives yet, but I mean, let's not set this in stone, but I think we have the potential to grow our audience 2 to 3 times over the next year.
Yeah,
So I think that's a reasonable number.
I think in the end, a lot of it is also going to depend, of course, on the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? Like, what's going to happen with Bitcoin? Is it going to explode? Well, everything's going to be very easy, right? Or much, much easier. If it's not, then everything's going to be much, much harder. So a lot of it, to a large extent, it depends on that. But at the same time, we do think there are a lot of people still in the Bitcoin space who haven't heard about us ever, who've never listened to an episode, but who would like to, who would be interested. So one of our focuses is going to be reaching those people.
Now, another area is just improving quality. When you're doing a podcast with very little resources, like using €50 lights and €70 cameras over a ADSL connection, and and just consumer grade gear, you can produce good quality content, but if we don't have a producer who's here all the time, who's going to make sure that our mics are running okay, and so that, I think that has been sort of a challenge, is keeping the quality level consistent, whether that be audio quality on the audio version, or preventing like mishaps on the Hangout and things like that. So I think improving that quality, improving the brand quality, and just streamlining processes is also going to be very important in the next year. And so we're definitely looking at that, and those are things that we'll be working on in the next couple months. But like you say, building community, and one area that I think we'll also start to endeavor in is how we can diversify Epicenter as a platform, whether that means developing new types of content, new formats, bringing more correspondents or hosts on. These are not, these things are not defined yet, but I think over the next year we'll have to start looking at how can we build new things on top of this existing platform that we've built.
So, being at the end of our show, sort of our year-end show, Sebastien, what are the two areas that you are most excited to watch in 2015?
dApps and UI.
dApps,
So,
UI.
and specifically UI around security. And so what I mean by dApps, so we talked about dApps. I'm excited to see more dApps in the App Store, more dApps that are sort of appealing to a wide audience, where people could just kind of hop on and start using it, and get into the cryptocurrency ecosystem. I think Gems is a really good example of that. I really believe in what they're doing. Storage is another one. and I think we'll see more and more examples of just really high quality dApps. Where you don't even, I mean, people coming into it perhaps don't even know that they're using a decentralized platform, and start using the currency within it to get into cryptocurrency. The other area, UI. So whether that be UI around creating smart contracts, for example, creating crowd sales, but then also around security. I think that we've come a long way in improving UI around security, but that's definitely one area that needs to keep improving, and I think we'll see some interesting examples of that in the next year.
Yeah, absolutely. So with me, I think two areas are, for me, the regulation is just, I think that hopefully 2015 is going to be the last year that I think regulation is going to be so front and central, but I think 2015, I mean, it probably won't be, but 2015 definitely, I think it's just going to play a really big role, and it's going to determine a lot about where things are going. So that's definitely something I'll be paying a lot of attention to. And the other thing is, I think the adoption by financial institutions, something I'm really interested in. I think could have a big impact, sort of indirectly, but it's one thing I'll be watching a lot.
And I will be watching you pay attention to those topics.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so with that, I think it's time to wrap up. It's time to wrap up 2014, and it's time to wrap up this episode. So thanks so much for listening. We do appreciate it very much. Also, thanks for the question submitted. There was another question we didn't get to. You knew him, some guy from Crypto Articles mentioned that he had something to say about the drop-off in traffic. Maybe he can email you about it, and hopefully we can cover it in some way, or I'll discuss it.
Sure.
Yeah, so thanks so much for listening, and thanks for following us this year. Now, our next episode, as we mentioned, is coming up exactly a week from now, same time, same place. It's going to be with Robert Sams, and it's going to be about creating a sort of a stable cryptocurrency. It's going to be very, very interesting. Really look forward to that. And if you want to support the show, you can follow us on Twitter at Epicenter BTC. You can leave us an iTunes review. It helps new people find the show. So we would totally appreciate that. We'd love that. You can also leave us a tip at epicenterbitcoin.com/tips, or
and subscribe to us on YouTube as well. I mean, I think if you subscribe to us on YouTube, you get the Hangouts automatically.
Right. Good point. Yes, do that too. Do all of it right now. And so to you, our listeners, have a great end of the year. Have a great start into 2015, and we look forward to seeing you next week.